Imagine being lured into a world of luxury, promises of fame, and endless wealth only to discover that everything you thought was a dream is actually a nightmare. This is the shocking true story of a young model whose pursuit of success led her straight into a dangerous web of exploitation and violence. In the glittering city of Dubai, behind the masks of power and privilege, lies a hidden darkness that few are brave enough to expose. Stay tuned to uncover the truth. This story will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the price of fame. Maria Kovalchuk was a 20-year-old Ukrainian model, young, radiant, and full of dreams. She was like so many other girls from Eastern Europe, drawn to the bright lights of cities like Dubai, where opportunities for success seemed endless. She had always been a cheerful, smiling presence in every photo, projecting an energy that suggested an uncheckable ambition to reach the top of the modeling world. Her social media was filled with images of her posing for photo shoots, attending small local events, and showing off the life of a young woman striving to make it big. She wasn't just posting pictures, she was showcasing a dream, one that she was actively working toward. Maria's journey wasn't easy. It never is for a young model trying to make a name for herself. But she had something many others lacked: determination, drive, and the belief that this glamorous world could become her reality. Her story was one of ambition, chasing an international career, building a portfolio that could get her noticed by the right people, and securing financial independence. Like many aspiring models, she dreamed of working with top designers, walking in famous shows, and maybe even landing major contracts with international brands. She imagined traveling to exotic places, meeting influential people, and living a life that most people could only fantasize about. By March 2025, Maria's dream had taken her to Dubai, a city known for its towering skyscrapers, luxurious resorts, and its promise of wealth and opportunity. In her mind, it was the perfect place to further her career. She was thrilled by the possibilities: photo shoots at glamorous locations, luxurious events, and, most importantly, meeting the right people who could make her dreams come true. She was finally where she wanted to be, on the brink of success, surrounded by the kind of people who could make that success happen. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Her Instagram updates, full of wide smiles and captions about new adventures, painted a picture of a young girl living her best life. But as she settled into Dubai, Maria began to make some key connections. Some, as it turned out, were far more dangerous than she could have ever anticipated. She had met a man, someone who called himself a sheik, a wealthy figure who promised her a life of luxury and possibly even a marriage to someone of high status. To Maria, this sounded like the opportunity of a lifetime. She had always dreamed of marrying someone who could provide the security and the life she had only seen in the fairy tales. For many girls like Maria, the allure of such a promise is irresistible: an escape from the struggles, the poverty, and the uncertainty of their daily lives. Maria felt she was on the verge of something big, something extraordinary. She posted excitedly on her social media, telling her mother that she had arrived at a fancy hotel, where an exciting party was being held. "There are interesting people here," she told her mother. "They say they can help me move ahead in my career." It all sounded like the beginning of something magical, a dream coming true. But what Maria didn't know was that the people she was meeting weren't just about making her career, they were about trapping her into something far darker. What began as an innocent message about a glamorous night out would soon spiral into a nightmare from which there would be no return. At that moment, Maria didn't realize that the sparkling world she had walked into would soon turn into a place where everything she had ever dreamed of would unravel. The life she envisioned, one filled with luxury, excitement, and fame, was about to take a terrifying turn into an unknown abyss. Her story, which started with hope and ambition, would soon become a chilling cautionary tale, one that no one, especially Maria, could have ever seen coming. Maria's excitement grew as she received an invitation to a party like no other, a private, exclusive gathering where she would meet some of the most powerful people in Dubai. For someone like Maria, this was the dream. It was everything she had been working toward: an opportunity to be seen, to make the right connections, and to move further along the path she had so carefully crafted for herself. The man who invited her, the one who had introduced himself as a sheik, seemed to promise her more than just a chance to mingle with the rich and famous. He made it clear that this wasn't just another party, it was a ticket to something much bigger. His connections, he claimed, could propel her career forward, opening doors to modeling contracts, wealthy benefactors, and perhaps even a life with someone who could offer her the kind of future she had always dreamed of. For Maria, it sounded like the break she had been waiting for. Her social media posts reflected her excitement as she shared with her followers the news of the exclusive event she was about to attend. "This is the opportunity I've been looking for," she posted, clearly thrilled. She was about to step into a world where ambition and beauty seemed to meet wealth and influence, a world she had seen only in the magazines and the movies. But what Maria didn't know was that the allure of this world was far more dangerous than it appeared. Behind the glossy surface of luxury and privilege lay a dark and twisted reality. VIP parties in Dubai, often portrayed as glamorous affairs with champagne flowing and celebrities in attendance, are not always what they seem. Beneath the surface, these events can be far from innocent. The invitation that Maria had accepted was to one such event, a party that promised an evening of excess. But there was a catch: this wasn't a public affair. It was a closed event reserved for only the most exclusive guests. The location: a high-end skyscraper hotel, with an entire VIP floor reserved for those who could afford to access it. The floor was sealed off from the rest of the hotel, accessible only through special key cards or private security clearance. This wasn't a place for ordinary guests. This was a world of wealth, influence, and, as Maria would soon discover, secrets that no one was supposed to know. Maria's arrival at the hotel felt like the beginning of something magical. She was surrounded by models, actors, and other glamorous individuals, people who seemed to have it all, people whose lives were just as flawless as the photos they posted on social media. The men she met spoke in a mixture of English and Arabic, their conversations casual but filled with promises of power, connections, and wealth. Some of them were even rumored to be close associates of the sheik, and though she didn't know it at the time, these people would become part of a much darker narrative. The party seemed like a dream. The women were laughing, posing for pictures, and mingling with the men, who were often older, wealthy, and well-dressed. Everything about the evening felt like a perfect fit for the glamorous life Maria had longed for. She felt like she was finally part of the inner circle. She was being seen, being admired, being noticed. But as the night wore on, something began to feel off. It wasn't just the overwhelming sense of power in the air. It was the way the atmosphere subtly shifted as the evening grew later. The staff, who had earlier been courteous and professional, became more distant and reserved, almost as if they were told not to interfere with the VIP guests. The energy in the room changed. The light-hearted conversations turned to hushed whispers. Maria, like many others, could feel that something was not right, but at the time, she didn't know exactly what it was. As the clock ticked toward the early hours of the morning, the party went from lively to chaotic. People were getting louder, and the laughter was no longer as genuine. Maria noticed that the men who had been so friendly earlier were becoming more insistent. The attention she was receiving started to feel less like admiration and more like an expectation. And then there were the girls, other models, who seemed to have already given in to the men's advances, their faces no longer bright with excitement but dull with resignation. It was clear that this was no ordinary party, and what had started as an opportunity to network and elevate her career had turned into something far darker. What Maria didn't understand then was that this was a world built on exploitation, where young women like her were often used and discarded once they had served their purpose. The sheik and his associates, the very people who had promised her a dream life, were part of a much more sinister operation. What was supposed to be an introduction to luxury was actually a trap, one that no one was meant to escape. Maria had unwittingly stepped into the middle of a twisted game, and there was no way out. The excitement she had felt earlier in the evening would soon be replaced with fear. The promises of a better life would be shattered in a night that Maria would never forget. As the party continued, Maria began to feel the full weight of what she had gotten herself into. She had entered a world where the rules were different, where people were treated as disposable commodities, where women were seen as nothing more than objects to be used. And in that world, she was just another girl, one who had the misfortune of stepping too far into a game where the stakes were far higher than she could have ever imagined. What happened next would change Maria's life forever, and the nightmare she had unknowingly stepped into was just beginning. As the hours passed and the party in the VIP suite continued, the atmosphere became increasingly unsettling. What had once felt like an exciting, glamorous evening filled with promise now seemed to turn into something darker and more dangerous. Maria, like the other girls, had been swept into a whirlwind of luxury and excess. The glistening chandeliers, the sparkling drinks, the elegant gowns and designer suits, all of it now felt like a facade, a mask hiding a much more sinister reality. At first, the men seemed charming, offering compliments, drinks, and the kind of attention Maria had always dreamed of. They spoke with ease about their wealth, their connections, their influence. To her, it all felt like a fairy tale until the undercurrent of something darker began to emerge. There was something about the way the men looked at her and the other girls that made her skin crawl. The warmth in their eyes was gone, replaced with something cold, something calculating. Maria's initial excitement had started to fade. She could feel the weight of the stares and the growing sense of unease settling in her chest. She had been told this was a VIP party, that everyone here was someone important, that this was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. But now, she began to question everything. The promises she had been given felt more like traps. Was she being used for something more than her beauty? The more time Maria spent in the VIP suite, the more she began to notice things that had previously slipped by unnoticed. There was a shift in the behavior of the other women. The initial excitement they had shown when entering the room was now replaced by a tired resignation. Some of them were no longer smiling. Their faces had grown stiff and hollow. It was as if they had been there before, perhaps many times, and had learned to play their part in a game they had no control over. The men, too, had changed. They were no longer just enjoying the party, they were moving through the crowd with a sense of purpose, as if the women were nothing more than their possessions for the night. Maria couldn't help but feel like she was just another piece in a well-rehearsed performance, a performance where the rules were set by the wealthy, entitled men who owned the show. The hotel staff, once courteous and professional, had begun to behave strangely as well. Maria overheard hushed conversations between some of the workers, their expressions tense, almost as if they knew something she didn't. She noticed that security personnel stood close to the entrance, their eyes scanning the room. It was clear that something wasn't right, but no one dared to speak up. This was a closed VIP event, and in such circles, the guests were untouchable. Maria tried to focus on the women around her, seeking some comfort in their shared experience. But what she found was unsettling. Some of the girls seemed to be completely detached, their eyes glazed over, as if they were no longer fully present. Others were standing too close to the men, their smiles too forced. They seemed to have given into the power that surrounded them, perhaps too scared to resist the advances or too worn down by their own experiences in this glittering world. It wasn't long before Maria began to realize the dark truth about the world she had entered. This wasn't just a party. It was a carefully orchestrated scene, a trap designed to exploit young women like her, attractive, naive, and eager to make it big. What she had thought was a chance to network with the rich and powerful was actually an opportunity for these men to use their wealth and influence to control and manipulate the women who dared to enter their world. But it wasn't just the men she had to worry about. The women like her were trapped in a system that demanded submission. It wasn't about empowerment or glamour, it was about control. The glitz and glamour of the party were nothing more than an illusion, hiding the exploitation that lay beneath. The smiles of the men were masks, and the lavish surroundings were just a backdrop to a much more dangerous game. Maria wanted to leave. She wanted to run. But she didn't know how. She didn't know if she could trust anyone. The exits were controlled, the security was tight, and the people she thought she could trust, those who had promised her the world, were now part of the system that sought to take it all away. The night dragged on, and Maria's unease only grew. The drinks flowed, the laughter continued, but beneath it all, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness that no one dared acknowledge. But everyone felt. The men were becoming more aggressive, their advances more insistent. It was as if the girls were nothing more than commodities to be used and discarded. At that moment, Maria understood something she had never truly grasped before. The world she had been chasing was not the fairy tale she had imagined. It was a world built on manipulation and control. A world where young women were valued only for their appearance and their ability to comply with the demands of those in power. The dreams of a glamorous life, of fame and wealth, were just a mask for the darkness that lay underneath, the darkness that Maria was now trapped in. As the hours ticked on and the night continued to unfold, Maria realized she had made a terrible mistake. She had stepped into a world where nothing was as it seemed. And worse, she had no idea how to escape. The people she had trusted were now the ones who held her captive in a world of darkness, and the party, which had seemed like the start of her big break, had turned into her worst nightmare. As the night wore on, the once glittering atmosphere of the VIP party took on an increasingly sinister tone. The music, which had once been lively, now seemed distant, as if muffled by the growing sense of unease that settled over the room. Maria, like the other girls, tried to hold on to the excitement, but every passing minute felt heavier. The weight of the situation began to press down on her chest. She felt suffocated by the luxury that surrounded her, the stares and the expectations from the men who had once seemed so charming but were now becoming something far more frightening. It was then, in the midst of the chaos, that Maria noticed something troubling. She wasn't the only one feeling trapped. The other models, those who had once been so vibrant and lively, had become quieter. Some of them seemed to shrink into the background, as if they had long ago given into the reality of their situation. They no longer spoke to the men with enthusiasm. Instead, their voices were strained, their eyes searching for an escape that was nowhere to be found. Maria's mind raced. She wanted to leave. She wanted to go back to her hotel, to pick up the phone and call her mother, to tell her that everything was okay. But she couldn't. She didn't know how to leave. The exits were controlled. The men had started to watch her more closely, their movements subtle but menacing. She felt like she was becoming just another piece in their game. The night had gone on long enough. Maria's mind was reeling with the realization that she had stepped into a world that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She had been drawn in by promises of fame, fortune, and the allure of power, but now, it seemed, those promises were nothing more than empty words. She was exhausted physically and mentally. The luxury around her, once so appealing, now felt like a gilded cage. She had hoped that meeting these people would propel her career, but instead, it had only made her feel smaller, more insignificant, and more alone. She began to realize that there was no way out. No matter how much she tried to fight the fear building inside her, it was clear that her world had turned upside down. Maria tried to leave the party, but the security guards at the door blocked her way. It was clear they weren't there to protect her. They were there to ensure the guests, the rich, powerful men, remained undisturbed. She tried to make her way to the elevator, hoping that maybe she could slip out unnoticed, but the men followed her. Their eyes were cold, and their behavior no longer concealed. They were predators, and she was their prey. Then came the moment that Maria would later struggle to remember, the moment that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Something happened that night, something violent, something that would forever shatter her understanding of the world she had entered. What transpired in that high-rise hotel room is still unclear. The few fragments of information that have surfaced are like shattered pieces of a broken mirror, disjointed, incomplete, and horrifying. Some witnesses from the hotel later spoke about hearing sounds of shouting, sounds of conflict coming from the VIP floor. The sounds grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't the carefree laughter of a party anymore, it was something else. It was chaos, violence, and desperation. But no one intervened. The security team, many of whom were allegedly connected to the sheik's entourage, did nothing. The partygoers were too powerful, too influential. They were above reproach. By morning, when hotel staff came to clean the VIP floor, they found the aftermath of a night that had spiraled out of control. Several of the rooms were empty. Some of the girls had vanished completely. No one knew where they had gone. Personal items were left behind, strewn about as if the night had ended in a hurry. But amidst the disorder, there were other signs, fragments of broken glass, ripped clothing, and signs of a struggle. One of the maids reported seeing signs of blood in the hallway, faint but unmistakable. It was enough to send a chill down her spine, but she was told to continue with her duties, to ignore what she had seen. No one was to question the guests, no one was to interfere. The hotel staff had been instructed to turn a blind eye to what happened behind those doors. The powerful men and women who attended such exclusive events were untouchable. As the day passed, it became evident that Maria had gone missing. She had vanished from the hotel without a trace, and no one, neither her friends nor the hotel staff, could account for where she had gone. Her phone went silent. Social media updates stopped. The world Maria had once been a part of, the world of smiling selfies, glamorous photo shoots, and exciting new opportunities, was suddenly gone. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. Her disappearance was met with silence at first, but the alarm bells began ringing when one of Maria's friends, who had not attended the party, grew concerned. She had been in contact with Maria up until that fateful night. When she tried to call Maria after the party, the phone rang and answered. Hours passed, then days. Her friend grew frantic. Something was terribly wrong. It was only after a few days of unanswered calls and mounting concern that the authorities began to take notice. But by then, Maria was already lost in a system that didn't care, lost in a world where her disappearance could easily be swept under the rug. It wasn't until several days later that the first real clue about Maria's whereabouts would surface. On the outskirts of Dubai, far from the glittering high-rises and luxury hotels, a random driver stumbled upon something horrific: Maria's body, battered and bruised, lying unconscious on the side of the road. She had been discarded like trash, left for dead after the violent events of the night. Her limbs were broken, her spine shattered, and she was barely alive. It was a miracle she had been found at all. The driver who discovered her immediately called for help, and paramedics rushed to the scene. But Maria was unrecognizable. Her face was swollen, her clothes torn, and she had no memory of what had happened in the hours between the party and her discovery. The doctors who treated her were shocked by the severity of her injuries. They believed she had been thrown from a moving vehicle, a violent and deliberate act designed to rid the perpetrators of any trace of their crime. She had been left for dead, discarded on a highway, as if her life meant nothing at all. But the questions were only beginning. What had happened in the hotel that night? Who had been responsible for this cruelty? Why had Maria been treated in such a brutal and callous way? The answers were elusive, hidden behind a veil of power, wealth, and influence. And the police were finding it harder to get answers as they dug deeper into the mystery of Maria's disappearance. The truth, it seemed, was just out of reach, a shadowy, horrifying reality that no one was willing to face. What had started as a glamorous dream had quickly spiraled into an unspeakable nightmare. And for Maria Kovalchuk, her fight for survival was only just beginning. As Maria lay in a hospital bed, her body battered and broken, her mind began to struggle with the overwhelming questions that haunted her. What had happened that night? Who had been behind the brutality she had suffered? And, perhaps most importantly, who was the man known only as the Sheikh, the figure whose name had been whispered around the luxurious halls of the VIP party, the man who seemed to control everything from behind the scenes? The Sheikh had been the catalyst, the one who had drawn Maria into this world of excess and illusion. He had introduced himself as a man of power, a man with influence over the high society of Dubai. To Maria, he had seemed like the answer to everything she had dreamed of: wealth, fame, and security. But behind his charismatic demeanor and his promises of a fairy tale life, something far darker lurked. There were many rumors about the Sheikh. Some claimed he was the nephew of a prominent emir, a member of the royal family with access to unimaginable wealth and influence. Others whispered that he was nothing more than a self-proclaimed prince, a man who had fabricated a title to play the role of the powerful ruler. The truth, however, remained obscured. No one seemed to know for sure who he really was or where his power truly came from. What was certain was that his reach extended far, and his wealth was boundless. As the investigation into Maria's case unfolded, it became clear that the Sheikh was a central figure. But finding him or even confirming his identity was an impossible task. The Sheikh, or the man who claimed to be him, had a network of people working on his behalf. His entourage was a collection of wealthy individuals who were equally elusive, their connections to powerful people in both Dubai and beyond making it nearly impossible to question them openly. In the days following Maria's discovery, the UAE authorities launched an investigation, but it quickly became apparent that questioning the Sheikh would not be as simple as it seemed. Some insiders hinted that the Sheikh's wealth had bought him protection from the law, from public scrutiny, and from any real investigation. His influence over local politics and law enforcement made him nearly untouchable. Those who might have tried to speak out against him were too intimidated to come forward, either out of fear or because they had been silenced in other ways. Several witnesses had been at the hotel on the night of Maria's disappearance, but no one seemed willing to speak openly about the events that had unfolded. The security footage from the hotel, which might have provided critical clues, was either inaccessible or incomplete. It was said that the Sheikh's personal security had control over the cameras, and they had been altered or conveniently wiped clean in the aftermath of the party. The Sheikh's name was never officially released by the authorities, but his presence loomed large over the investigation. Some believed he had fled the country, retreating into the shadows as the heat of the public outcry grew. Others speculated that he remained in Dubai, hiding behind a facade of wealth and diplomacy, using his money to shield himself from justice. What was even more disturbing than the mystery surrounding the Sheikh's true identity was the idea that he had used his position not just for personal gain, but to manipulate and control young women like Maria. It was rumored that he had built a kind of harem, an exclusive group of women from Europe, many of them models or aspiring actresses, who were lured into his world with promises of fame and fortune, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare of exploitation. Maria, though gravely injured and unable to speak, had been the first to hint at what had really happened behind those closed doors. In the days following her discovery, when she regained consciousness, she was reportedly able to provide some fragments of her memory, though her recollections were hazy. She mentioned a man who had introduced himself as the Sheik, and described how she had been forced into uncomfortable situations, intimidated, and threatened. Her testimony, though incomplete and scattered, painted a chilling picture of what had taken place in that VIP suite. The Sheik, for his part, was a shadow, a man whose true identity might never be known to the public, whose connections kept him just out of reach of any real accountability. And as the investigation pressed on, it became increasingly clear that finding the Sheik and bringing him to justice would not be easy. His wealth and influence had bought him protection, and the very people who could have exposed him were too afraid to speak out. Despite this, the story of Maria's suffering continued to spread, capturing the attention of the public both in Dubai and beyond. The mysterious Sheik, and the terrible events that had unfolded that night, had shaken the foundations of the glamorous world that many believed was untouchable. And while his true identity remained a mystery, his role in Maria's nightmare was undeniable. He was the architect of her fall, and the key to uncovering the dark truth behind the world of VIP parties that thrived on exploitation and fear. The question that remained, as the investigation slowly ground to a halt, was whether anyone would ever have the courage to truly uncover the truth. Would the Sheik remain a ghost, a shadow in the world of the rich and powerful? Or would his name, and the stories of his victims, eventually be brought to light? The answers seemed to lie in the hands of those who were willing to risk everything to expose him, those who could see beyond the glitter and the glamour, and who understood the true cost of a life built on lies. In the days and weeks following Maria's discovery, the shockwaves from her brutal treatment spread far beyond the glittering streets of Dubai. What was once a quiet, whispered scandal about a missing young model quickly became a full-blown international outrage. The story of Maria Kovalchuk, a young girl with dreams of success, whose life was shattered by the dark underbelly of the luxury world, captured the world's attention. Her physical recovery was slow, her body bearing the scars of violence that would never fully fade. But it wasn't just her body that had been scarred, it was her spirit. Maria was unable to speak much about the horrors she had endured, as her injuries left her physically and mentally shaken. Yet, as her health slowly improved, fragments of her story began to surface, fragments that painted a picture of a nightmarish world that no one wanted to acknowledge. Though the authorities in Dubai remained largely silent, the global outcry grew louder. Activists, human rights groups, and international media outlets seized on the case, demanding answers. The hashtag Justice for Maria trended across social media, and slowly, the cracks in the carefully crafted facade of Dubai's glittering luxury began to widen. As Maria's story spread, so did whispers about other women who had disappeared under similar circumstances, young girls from Eastern Europe, from Africa, from all corners of the world, lured into Dubai with promises of fame and wealth, only to vanish into the hands of the powerful. The more people spoke up, the more it became clear that this was not just an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger, darker network, one that had been operating under the radar for years. But the most powerful weapon in Maria's story was the simple fact that it would not be silenced. Despite efforts to bury the truth, her name became synonymous with the fight against exploitation and abuse in the world of modeling and entertainment. Her survival, her determination to fight back, became a beacon of hope for other victims who had been too afraid to speak out. The authorities, both in Dubai and in Ukraine, were forced to acknowledge the case. But despite their promises of an investigation, the wheels of justice turned slowly, hindered by a web of political and financial influence. The Sheik, still a shadowy figure, remained out of reach, his identity elusive and his whereabouts uncertain. Many speculated he had fled the country, using his wealth and connections to evade any real consequences. But even as the investigation stalled, Maria's story continued to resonate. Maria, though scarred, remained resolute. She became a symbol of resilience, her story, a stark reminder that the world of luxury and wealth often hides the darkest secrets. And while the people who had wronged her remained protected, her voice, a voice that had almost been silenced, carried on, urging others to stand up, speak out, and refuse to let the truth be buried. In the end, Maria's story was far from over. It was a story of survival, of exposure, and of the indomitable human spirit that refuses to be crushed. And as long as there were those willing to listen, her tale would never be forgotten. Maria Kovalchuk's story is one of darkness disguised by light, of a young girl's dreams shattered by the very world she had hoped to conquer. Her fight for survival, her struggle to reclaim a life she once believed was hers to take, is a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk behind the glittering promises of fame, fortune, and luxury. But this story isn't just about Maria, it's a warning to all those who might be tempted by the allure of an easy life, the promises of a fairy tale ending, or the idea that wealth and status can bring happiness and security. The reality is far more insidious. The temptation of glamour and power can draw you into a world where people are seen not as individuals, but as commodities to be used, manipulated, and discarded. Behind the shiny skyscrapers, the exclusive parties, and the designer dresses lies a hidden world of exploitation. Young girls, like Maria, are lured into it with the same promises, the same false hopes, and then they vanish into a system that treats them as disposable. It's a system that thrives on power, secrecy, and silence. Maria's survival, her story, is not just a testament to her strength, it is a call to action. It's a reminder that no matter how alluring the world of the rich and famous may seem, there is always a darker side that we must be willing to face. And if at least one person hears this warning, if at least one person is saved from falling into the same trap, then Maria's suffering and survival will not have been in vain. The truth may be hidden in the shadows, but it can never be fully buried. Her story will continue to speak for those who cannot speak, to shine a light on the horrors that so many try to ignore. It is a story of resilience, of survival, and of the unyielding need to expose the truth. So, as you move through the world, remember Maria's warning. Not every invitation to the glittering world of luxury is as it seems. Sometimes, the line between dreams and nightmares is thinner than we care to admit. And if you're not careful, you might find yourself on the wrong side of it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world.